Fairies, a legendary figure in European folklore. Are they little enchanted elves with glowing green lights, or are they messengers of hope and peace who put money under your pillow after you lost your tooth? Grab a blanket, turn off your lights, and get ready to be enchanted and be put to sleep. The Tooth Fairy. One night, when I was around 6 or 7 years old, I lost my second tooth. I was very excited about the Tooth Fairy and placed my tooth under my pillow, knowing that when I awoke in the morning, there would be a dollar bill waiting for me instead. Like most small children, I was excited and wide awake in my bed. I was never afraid of the dark, and my light was out. The door opened ajar at my mother's insistence. In those days, I kept my old high bed pushed against the wall, next to the window, and I would hold the blinds out of the way and sit on my bed and stare out into the front yard when I couldn't sleep. Our house was on the left at a dead end. There were no streetlights, and our yard was over an acre. The house sat rather far from the street. My window faced the street, and there was a large bush several feet in front of it. Well, on that night, I couldn't sleep because I was so excited about the Tooth Fairy coming. There was a full moon, and the yard was just bright enough to see if anyone was walking around. As I was gazing out the window, I saw a bright orb of greenish-yellow light coming towards my window from the street. The ball of light grew as it traveled down the yard towards my window. Then it turned around the bush and floated out of sight around the side of the house. This could not have been a flashlight or anyone in my yard, as I would have seen them. The ball of light was about the size of an adult's fist, and it floated around 5 feet from the ground. When I saw the light, I dived under my blankets and pretended to be asleep because I believed that I had just seen the Tooth Fairy, and I was afraid that she would know that I had seen her and would not come to take my tooth. I felt no fear at all, just excitement and a bit of guilt, like I had seen something I should not have. At some point, I fell asleep. I never really thought about it for years. I told no one because at that age, I honestly believed in things like the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny, and I didn't think that I had seen anything mysterious or strange. But now, when I think back, the memory is still very clear. I honestly cannot figure out what it was that I really saw that night. Bright green lights. I need to start being quite frank, not to be rude, but that you can establish what kind of person I really am. I am a scientist who is also an atheist. I search for the truth and logical explanation in things. Having said this, I've always had a sensitivity to people around me, to their thoughts and feelings and the energy of places. Through a few experiences that have happened to me, I am wise enough to know that there is much that occurs in this world that cannot be explained. I say this up front, as I am sure there are other such people out there who want to feel like they are not alone. One does not have to be religious to believe in the unknown. It has taken me some courage to post this, but I really wanted to connect with people who would perhaps understand. When I was 5 years old, I lost my first tooth. I was so excited at the prospect of the Tooth Fairy coming that I could not sleep. It was a really hot summer night, but I did not want to put my fan on in case the Tooth Fairy got sucked into the fan. I laugh now remembering it. But about midnight, I drifted off to sleep and awoke again in the early morning, probably about 3 a.m. The first thing I did was check the egg cup next to my bed where I had placed my tooth. To my sadness, the tooth was still there. I got up and went into my 7-year-old brother's room. He, for some reason, was awake as well, equally excited about the Tooth Fairy perhaps. I explained that she had not come yet, so he accompanied me back to my room and sat with me on my bed in the hope that we may see her. We sat, cross-legged, chatting, when something caught my eye in the doorway. I looked up, and there, clear as day, was the most beautiful, bright fluorescent green light I had ever seen. To this day, I have not seen a color so beautiful. It was a small light, as if it had a center point, with the darkness less dark towards the edges. It was round in shape and very small, a bit bigger than the size of a golf ball, but very, very bright. It entered the room at quite a height, near to the top of the doorway, and was moving slowly, drifting lower as it moved across the room. I grabbed my brother's arm and pointed. He turned and gasped. We then turned back to each other. We had both been told many times that the Tooth Fairy would not come if we saw her. So, in an action I regret to this day, I said, "Let's cover our eyes so that we don't scare her." And that's what we did. Both my brother and I stopped looking at the light that was moving towards us. When I opened my eyes again, the light was gone. I have never seen it since. I am not for a second suggesting that this was definitely a fairy, although my childhood self believed this for many years, but I do know that this was not something I imagined. My brother and I have never spoken about that day since it happened, and I have carried the memory with me ever since. I did not feel threatened or scared by it, only joy and excitement. To this day, whenever I feel nervous in a place, I think of that light, and how lucky I was to see it, whatever it was. The reason for my post after all these years, I am now in my late 20s, is that since then, I have experienced a few things that I could not explain through logic or science, and I have for some reason been drawn closer to this memory. I just wanted to know if anyone else knew what it may have been, or if anyone else has experienced or heard of such a thing. I have searched your site and have only seen green lights mentioned once, and not in this manner. Thank you for taking the time to read this. Fairy in the Woods. My boyfriend and I were working for an environmental organization in Eugene, Oregon. One evening, we attended a work gathering in the woods outside of the city. The woods were owned by an old deadhead with long flaming red hair who loved to spout nonsense and walk around in a carved cane. The cane was carved by one of the many boys in their early 20s who lived in the woods and made a living carving. They could do backflips from their standing feet, and when we went into the woods with them, they were flipping off of trees. The owner of the woods took a liking to us and invited us to go on a short hike with him. He showed us numerous little cages set up around the walk and explained to us that the woods were infested with fairies and that he was going to catch one. I remember catching my boyfriend's eye and smiling at that. We stayed up all night, and the hour before dawn found us in the woods, sitting on a fallen tree alone together. A tiny creature, about an inch or two long, and light in color flew up to our faces and hovered in front of his nose. It wasn't a bug, but it didn't look like Tinkerbell with hair and long limbs. A strange thing happened then. It was like a love spell. We went into a state of sweet amour and came out of it about 10 minutes later in a glade, lying on the ground with our shirts off. We'd never felt like this before together. In fact, I had never felt like that before ever. So graceful and light and good. I can see why he wanted to catch one. You can't bottle that stuff. Circles and Fairies myth. This is not a ghost story as much as it's an experience that I can get no information about. I live about 3 miles away from Loughru Cairns, Ireland. The cairns are great structures, originally built around 4000 BC as burial chambers. Myself and 2 friends took it upon ourselves to walk up every morning and every night as a way to lose weight. The climb up was very steep. It was a very good workout, and when you get to the top, you have an overwhelming view of the country from one of its highest peaks. The days turned into evenings as our children would be in bed, and it was easier to get somebody to watch them when they were asleep. The evenings got dark from 8 onwards, so by the time we hit the peak, it would be dark. We would usually do 2 climbs in the one evening. When we climbed in the dark, although we had brought torches, we would be a little bit creeped out, as it was an ancient burial ground, and also because we thought it was probably a haven for drug dealers as it was so remote. Our skinnier friend would always show off by going 6 steps in front of us. The first night we went up, it was dark. We had our torches. When we got as high as the peak we would always go to into the burial ground and do a lap to turn around. The only way you will know what it looks like is if you Google image it. There are 4 or 5 standing stones in circles, which were graves, and then one major one in the middle. As we walked by the first of these groups of stone, myself and my fellow skinny friend heard a loud male voice. It was loud, but whatever he said was unrecognizable. None of us were talking, and we turned to each other asking what we had thought he said. We hastily said, "Hello?" After a few minutes of explaining to our skinny friend, who didn't hear because she was so far ahead. Also, being up that high is extremely windy. We frantically ran down the mountain because we were just totally creeped out. The next day was a beautiful day. Neither of us were working, so we said we would take on the mountain early and attempt to bring the kids. When we got to the standing stones, we had found flowers shredded in the stone circles, with 3 to 4 smaller stone circles. The small stone circles and flowers were not there just the day before, and we climbed this place every single day. These flowers and stone circles were all in 5s. My friend said, "Don't walk in them, as you're upsetting the fairies or disturbing the dead spirits. Does anybody know what these stone circles may have been? Thank you for reading."